This is a little video about rhoticity. Basically, rhoticity is about when you pronounce an R. So this little video is in 4 parts. The first part is a general introduction to rhotic and non-rhotic accents, and parts 2, 3 and 4 look at some of the subtler variations between the two.
Part 2 looks at when it's okay to drop R's in a rhotic accent. Part 3 looks at linking R's. And Part 4 looks at hyperrhoticity, or extra R's, R's that crop up even when they're not in the spelling. Part 1. What's the difference between a rhotic accent and a non-rhotic accent?
A rhotic accent will pronounce all the written R's, and a non-rhotic accent will only pronounce R when it's before a vowel. Let's have a look at some individual words spoken in a non-rhotic accent, my accent in fact, and notice how the R's are not pronounced.
Nurse, start, north, force, curse, near, square, cure. Now, if I had a rhotic accent, these words would sound very different. You'd actually be able to hear the R. Nurse, start, north, force, curse, near, square, cure.
So rhoticity is nothing about how you pronounce an R. A written R can be pronounced in lots of different ways. It only tells you when to pronounce an R.
Remember, rhoticity is a question of when you say R, not how.
Now, a rhotic accent will pronounce R's in all sorts of places. A non-rhotic accent won't. But does that mean all the R's have to be pronounced?
Part 2. Do you have to pronounce all the R's in a rhotic accent?
Not necessarily is the short answer. There are shades of rhoticity. So in everyday connected speech, too many R's next to each other in the mouth can cause a sort of R traffic jam. So in fact, some rhotic speakers will drop the occasional R. General American is a good example of a fine upstanding rhotic accent, but you'll hear that in these examples the first R has been dropped.
Interfere, governor, surprise, caterpillar.
And in these examples there's an R just before the ending, so the R on the end basically disappears.
Posterior, murderer, caterer.
So far we've looked at R's occurring in individual words, but we tend to like to put words together to form phrases and sentences, and when that happens, all sorts of things can happen with an R.
Part 3. Linking R's, or R's between words.
Now, there are basically 2 types of linking R. So we're going to start with a linking R that happens in both rhotic and non-rhotic accents. Listen to these 2 following examples spoken by me in my non-rhotic accent.
It's nice weather today. The weather on Sunday was nice.
So you'll have noticed there that in the second example there was a clearly pronounced R on the end of weather.
The weather on Sunday was nice.
Remember the rule for a non-rhotic accent?
For a non-rhotic accent, only pronounce R before a vowel.
In the weather on Sunday, the word weather is followed by the word on, which begins with a vowel. So that little R on the end of weather gets to stay. So that was the first type of linking R. For the second type, have a listen to these.
There's a pizza on the table. Bob plays the tuba in a wind band. I gave Amanda a letter.
So these R's were not written, but they are quite common in connected speech for non-rhotic speakers. Now, old-fashioned speech teachers would have called those intrusive R's, naughty R's that weren't really invited to the party, but they do happen all the time in connected speech with non-rhotic accents. Now, this is where it gets slightly tricky, because paradoxically, if you're doing a rhotic accent, it's best to avoid doing that sort of non-written, intrusive linking R.
Remember, an intrusive R is an R that isn't in the spelling.
And if you're doing a general American accent, it's really important to never stick an R on the end of words like Amanda, pizza, or tuba. The following examples will really grate on an American ear.
Pizza for lunch. Playing the tuba sometimes. Giving Amanda a letter.
Which brings us nicely to the subject of hyperrhoticity, or extra R's.
Part 4. Hyperrhoticity, or extra R's.
Let's look at this example from a Dorset accent, which is rhotic.
Pajamas.
So this kind of hyperrhoticity often happens with a word that's been imported from another language and perhaps the speaker hasn't seen it written down. Maybe he heard an RP speaker say pajamas and assumed that R sound was the same as the R sound in start. So he just put the R in to fit in with his idea of how the language works.
Pajamas.
So that, in quite a small nutshell, is rhoticity.
Remember, rhoticity is about when you say R, not how. For a fully rhotic accent, pronounce all the R's. For a non-rhotic accent, only pronounce R before a vowel.
And just remember, there are shades of rhoticity and nobody likes an R traffic jam.